Hello, wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of the Finnovator with me, Stuart Bell, business coach and founder of Ardere Coaching Consulting. This is a continuation of a new theme in the Finnovator podcast. As you would know, the Finnovator has always been about sitting down with practice owners who've achieved particularly amazing success, people with really interesting business models, or alternatively, subject matter experts who really know their stuff. And in an open conversation, I really like to unpack the story behind their journey, the success, the failures en route, and ultimately the things that have driven them to do what they've done and the circumstances that have led them to create whatever they've created. But recently I had the insight that after 8 years developing an increasingly huge body of content for our Practice Evolution and Practice Foundation programs, which includes live video training, tools and templates, and a whole bunch of other things, it was time to share some of these training modules more widely outside the program in the audio format via the podcast. I've already covered off on websites, designing them for advice business. I did a whole session on how to make a client portal work for your business. And most recently, I unpacked one of my favorite modules to build, which was called Frictionless, which is all about finding ways to improve your process. In this one, I also want to take an aim at the time thing. I think particularly since a lot of the changes that came in Australia, at least since the Royal Commission, not to mention the introduction of new digital mediums of communication and a whole bunch of other things, the world has got faster. The world has got expecting things more quickly. And for many of us, the pace at which we work has increased. And what happens when urgent comes in, as any practitioner, as any person, is often the things that are important take a back seat. Marketing is a classic one. A lot of people forget to do marketing because they're just too busy doing all that stuff that just comes into your inbox every single day and demands your attention like insistent toddlers. There you go. There's a metaphor for you. Well, this one's called the 10-hour reclaim formula, and it's kind of has its genesis in a process that I often work with and apply to advisors who really want to do some work with me, but just don't see how they're going to fit it in. And the ultimate goal of this is to help them find at least 10, sometimes more hours in the week that they can get back by either eliminating certain things, delegating better, using technology, ultimately just changing the way it works. Now, there's more to this topic, and if we were to dive into the curriculum, we would find not just modules around systems and processes and delegations and team operations. We would also find a proprietary tool that we built called Role Audit, which you can probably find at roleaudit.au. But anyway, this is kind of really dived into it. And the purpose of this was really to share with you the most common strategy. I think there's 14 in all. And collectively, obviously you wouldn't implement them all, but collectively there's 40 hours worth of time savings. So all you got to do is pick 2 or 3, and straight away you hit your 10 hours worth of savings. I think we actually built this out as a lead magnet as well. So if you do a bit of search online, 10-hour time reclaim formula, you might even find it, but I might even try and put it in the show notes. But anyway, if you're an advisor and one of the things that you find is just there's so much you want to get done, but the thing that stops you from doing it is at the end of the week when you sit down, you just realize you've run out of time. This might be a way for you to halt that problem, to take a good look at 14 different areas and find the time back so you can focus on doing things. Hopefully that'll give you even more time, maybe bring in new clients, change the type of clients, and do some of that work that I know really shifts the dial on growing business models and changing fundamentally the way that businesses operate and grow. Cool, that's it from me. I hope you really enjoy the 10-hour time reclaim formula. And as always, if you like the content, the best thing you can do for me is head down to the review section of whichever podcast platform you're doing or using. Leave a good star review. Ideally a 5-star would be really, really nice. And leave a bit of feedback to tell others who this is for, what you like about the podcast, and who is going to get best value out of it. With no further delay, I want to hand over. And I hope you enjoy the 10-hour time reclaim formula. There's kind of a big idea behind this, and I've done a lot of workshops on time management. It always comes in sooner or later. And it was a while ago, I heard someone put this scenario forward as a way of kind of positioning the levers we can play and we can't play. And scenario one is, there's 2 scenarios. Scenario one is, I want you to imagine you're at home. You're on your laptop, you're working away, you're doing some work, whatever you're working on, it's important work, it's advice, it's whatever it is. And a child comes in. Maybe it's your child, maybe it's a nephew or a niece or someone you're minding. And they go, hey, Matt, hey, Lyle, do you want to come and play with me? And you look at your laptop and you look at the child and you go, I'm really sorry, I can't. I've got to do this work. That's scenario one, okay? Scenario two, same laptop, same work, same child walks in. The difference is this time they've got a cut all the way down their hand. They've cut themselves with glass and they're bleeding all over the place. Now, most people, when you put this scenario and you say, what would you do in the second scenario? They go, of course, I'd jump up and I'd help them. It's a medical emergency. And so the question that was posed to me a while back, and I loved it, which was, what's the difference between those two situations? Now, obviously, one of them is someone's is hurt, they're in danger, so it's a bigger priority. But there's actually a second part to it. And the truth is, if you break it down, you actually lied the first time. Because if we were being absolutely truthful, what we would have said to that child is, what I'm working on right here and now is a higher priority to me than playing with you. You get my sense on that? Now, I'm not being judgmental here. I'm not trying to say that because you said that you're a bad parent, because frankly, there are some times when Hermione comes in or Nate comes in and they're like, oh, can you help me with this? And I'm just like, I really need to get through this. This is something that I made a commitment to do. But it's more that when you actually unpack just that simple question, you kind of start to realize that along the way, we sometimes make assumptions about, we tell ourselves lies about our actual relationship with time. And when you pull it back, you realize that maybe we have more control than we realize. Peter Drucker, I think, said it really eloquently when he said that the one universal condition is everything we do in life takes time, whether it's spending time with family and friends or doing work. It all takes time and uses up time. And it's that one thing that's irreplaceable. Once it's gone, you can't get it back. Now, you can definitely outsource certain tasks and you can get support team to sort of ease that up. But ultimately, truly, it is one of those resources that money can't buy. And I think one of the things you tend to notice with people who are, Peter deals a lot with executives, but I think it's a good sort of barrier to look at or a good benchmark, which is successful people tend to manage their time really, really well. Within the program under productivity, I've got a module called the Musk method, where we analyzed Elon Musk and what he does differently. And it was fascinating to see how much he can achieve with the same sort of 24 hours as you and me. Admittedly, I don't know if I'd want to spend too long inside his head. And I think my priorities are maybe a little bit different from his. Another way of looking at this is one of the guys I worked or had the opportunity to learn from on Corporate to Freedom way back in 2013 was Peter Davidson. And he had achieved a level of wealth because of his investment in PayPal, where his hobby was going around the world and doing research into the life, the childhood of Einstein. But Einstein's a pretty fascinating character. He, as we know, he was once quizzed about what the most important aspect of intelligence was, and his answer was imagination. And this is fascinating for me, coming from someone who, he wasn't that great at maths. He was good at maths, but much better than all of us. But ultimately, a lot of what was done in the background, relativity, was done by others. He kind of dreamed it up and came up with the basics. But when one of the things he's most known for is the theory of relativity. And the theory of relativity, if you're familiar with it, it's basically the idea that time, our relationship with time, is governed by the perspective that we have. So, for example, the classic experiment is you have two twins. One of them gets on a spaceship and goes to Alpha Centauri, traveling near the speed of light, comes back. It's a 6-year round trip. It might have taken them 6 years to get there, but while they're away, the time that's passed on Earth is equivalent to 20 years. So you get back, you're 6 years older, your twin is 20 years. And yet to you, it seems like it's not been that much difference. And this is kind of what relativity is all about. It's about the fact that time is governed by the person who's perceiving it. He was asked once by a student, allegedly, can you explain the theory of relativity in 2 minutes? He said, I can do better than that. He said, when you sit with a pretty girl for an hour and it feels like a minute, or you put your hand on a hot plate for a minute and it feels like an hour, that's relativity, which is quite an eloquent way of putting it. Now, the reason I lead with this is because if you subscribe to relativity, which most people do, then you also subscribe to the idea that time is influenced by the perception that you have of it. And we all know this. How many times have we been working on something really enjoyable and time just flies, right? Or alternatively, you start doing something really boring and time drags, which kind of leads me to the belief that maybe we can talk about all this time management. I'm going to share with you some real techniques, but maybe one of the best techniques is to change the way we perceive time, whether we have it, whether we don't have it, and how we approach it. Does that make sense so far? Cool. So I want to start with a bit of a deep dive. I'd love to know from you, what have you found personally to be the most beneficial or effective time-saving habits for you personally? Pop them in the chat box if you've got one or two, because I'd rather I'd like to get a bit of a sense of what you're already doing really, really well before we go.
I'm battling to come up with one.
Yeah?
I'm working on them.
Matt's going to talk about one we talked today, voice file notes. Matt, give us a quick overview. Why has that been particularly effective?
I think previously to have the meeting, I reckon I was probably spending half an hour just to do the email, do all the work out all the actions. But then we sat down, worked out the file note template, and then we started using is it Otter?
Yep.
And I reckon we can now knock out after a meeting in less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Probably a better file note, more detailed file note than we had before.
That's perfect.
And it's all done and dusted and compliant and done.
Nice. Rachel, blocking time for tasks, work in my calendar, love it. We're going to talk about that today. It's a great habit to get into, and not working out in my inbox. Tell me about that just quickly, not working out in my inbox, Rach. Sorry, I'm going to call you Rach because my wife's called Rachel. I'm so sorry.
Just setting time in my calendar at set times during the day to check my inbox.
Right.
Not using it as my to-do list.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think it was Taki I worked with once. He said the problem with the inbox is everybody's in there shouting at you to do the stuff they want you to do. And what they're shouting at you is not always the things you should be doing. Love it. Time blocks for Anita. I love that. Perfect. Organizing our Outlook calendars and blocking out time for no appointments. Perfect, baby. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, because I think blocking out the time is step one. Making sure you don't take anything with you that could notify you. Turn your notifications off. Put your phone on Do Not Disturb. Josh started using video explanations after previous flight tracks instead of lengthy emails to clients. How's that going, man? You look like it's like the Blues Brothers meets financial planning here.
Sorry, it's really glaring. I've got 4 hours of back-to-back Zoom meetings with stuff today, so I thought I'm just going to enjoy the view. Need to have a bit of passes. It was a little weird to get used to videoing self, but as you said, just you've got your phone and just start doing it.
Yeah.
And I actually did it for FSG update, which for clients they probably wouldn't even read it.
Yeah.
And I actually said in the video rather than in the email, can you give me some feedback on what you think about the video? And I had probably a quarter of the clients come back going, I love it. I'm going to engage more if you do this more often. So win.
Nice. It's funny. It's just when you get over that first hurdle, I do it with Boxer as well. When you get over that first hurdle of how they're going to take it, you actually sometimes find that they like it more.
I think I did the first version. I think I took like 10 takes because I was scratching my face or looking away from the camera or something. So
yeah,
I'm getting gradually better at doing them as I do them.
Perfect, man. Thank you. So there's a few that we've already got in there, and we'll expand on that. So let's just do a bit of a quick deep dive, and we can do this sort of just shout them out. We talk about lies that people tell themselves about the way they manage, and they're not always lies. They're just things we kind of say without really thinking about it. Off the top of your head, what are some of the most common phrases that we use when we're talking about time, which may not be true? Anybody shout? Matt, you got one for me?
I've got one. I'm too busy. I don't have time.
Yeah. I remember when I was in corporate, that was everybody's sort of mantra. How are you going? So busy. You know what I mean? What other ones are not very helpful? Debbie, Taylor.
We'll do it next week.
Do it next week. Yeah. Procrastinators. What do you want? Procrastination. When do you want it? Anytime soon. That's it. Matt, have you got one for me?
It's just too much on.
Too much on. Anyone got any other big ones, or shall I just share sort of a few that I've seen? Elizabeth, you look like you want to speak. No? Okay, that's a no. And again, I'm not saying these to kind of have a crack. I'm saying this because, I've caught myself saying these, and sometimes it's like the whole, I really should do that. And if you actually break down the should thing, it's not very helpful because it kind of indicates that A, you don't want to, and B, you're obligated. You could say it's just words, but just turning around and saying, I'm choosing to do this, or I'm going to do this, can often position it a lot better. Here's some ones that I've seen. I can get it done. You know what? I don't know about you, but there's rarely enough time in the day to get everything done. I genuinely believe that the most somebody can get done, unique tasks in a day, is 3 to 5. And personally, I think 5 is even, if you're doing 5, you're absolutely killing it. There's only limited things. I think sometimes when we look and go, I can get all this done in a day, we're not actually being real about that. Another one, I don't need to use my diary. I've got a task list. I've heard this a few times. I've got a to-do list. I think we all struggle with too much email, too much information, too much tasks, too many decisions, too much all sorts of stuff. And I get the power of a notebook. I use them myself. I use them for journaling. But my issue with to-do lists is, Rachel, and you kind of touched on it. If you firstly don't use your email for that, but secondly, when you actually sit down and you have to commit time in your diary to something, you're actually analyzing how long something's going to take at a far more useful level than to-dos. And secondly, I don't know about you, but I find that to-do lists never get completed. They just get bigger and bigger and bigger, which means you never get that satisfaction of completing things. This will only take a minute. Nothing ever takes a minute, not even the most simplest mechanical task. And the main reason is because if you're trying to flick from minute to minute to minute, there's a period of interruption between 15 to 45 minutes, which means you're dropping in and out and you're never getting into flow state. We're going to talk about this flow state thing. I don't know about you, but I caught myself yesterday trying to work on 3 things at the same time: build a slide deck, build a worksheet. And about an hour after looping over that way, I came back and go, oh, that's right, I was going to create that slide. And I just got lost in 2 or 3 tasks, caught myself doing it. I work best under time pressure. You know what? It's absolutely spot on that people can work faster under time pressure. But the question I always ask is whether you're finishing the work because it's the best it can be, or whether maybe because there's no time left. And also, did you really need to put yourself under so much stress? Would it not be easier if you give yourself a much earlier deadline, double the amount of time you thought you need, and then knock things off one small chunk at a time? I'll power through and get it done. Who's used that one? There's so many studies that have shown that sometimes stopping is actually the most efficient way of getting through. How many times have you, I know I've done it with work, presentation content, where you're working through and you go, you know what, I'm stuffed. And you're going for a walk or a bike ride or go to the gym, and you come back and it's done in 30 minutes. Stepping away sometimes is the best way to do it. I just need to find the right system or technology. I don't think there's any time management system, solution, or technology tool that's going to give you infinite time if the real problem is you're not giving yourself the opportunity to follow through on tasks, or you just got too much on. Fair enough? It's faster if I do it myself. You know what? This is always a lie, I feel. Firstly, if someone's focused on fewer tasks or specialization, they're going to get things done faster than someone who's got split focus. And if the real issue is you don't have the time to train people, that's actually not a time issue, it's a training issue. And choosing not to set aside the time to train people, I think, is kind of dooming yourself to repeat it. And it's always going to be a barrier for growth. In the intro video, I talked about the journey to leverage, and that middle bit where you start to go through the dangerous middle, that growth period between lifestyle business and true independent business. That's the point at which you don't do the training. It's always going to be dependent on you. I don't have enough time. I've left this one to last. We all have exactly the same amount of time. And when anybody says to me, I don't have time, it's never about the hours. It's usually about priority. They just don't see something as important, it's fine. As long as it's a considered decision, as long as the priority you're putting is not something that's, impulsive, or you're not looking at the right things. Overcommitting, having too much on your plate, or not even knowing the difference. And because the way you're doing things right now is potentially, resulting in waste at certain points. Does that make sense? I want to touch on these because I think sometimes when you kind of open it up and go, oh, maybe I do control this. Maybe if I wasn't trying to do too much, or maybe if I wasn't, doing it all myself, it might actually get easier in the long term. Okay. So in other words, I kind of look at it and I go, I reckon these are the real challenges when you break it down. The first thing I think is we are massively over-connected these days. Originally the slide said always connected. And I think the more and more you do it, the more and more it becomes a habit. Whether it's just not, whether it's doing that at night, which I think we're all guilty of at some point, but not only it's being available all the time. People can email you, they can text you, they can SMS you, they can phone you, and your expectation is that you'd respond. That often results in we're constantly distracted. We don't necessarily give our time the time to get into flow. Has anybody got kids? Have you ever noticed how when kids are bored and you leave them, you go and find something to do, half an hour later they find something? It's almost like that half an hour go be bored thing is the prerequisite to self-entertainment. It's an interesting thing. And often we allow ourselves to be frequently interrupted. And the problem with that is when that happens, you just end up stop-starting. And when you stop starting, you might feel like you're doing 120%, but you're actually about 35% output. So what I wanted to do today is kind of focus on 3 areas, helping you to define exactly what your role is supposed to be. And most importantly, what's not in your role. Defending your ability to focus on certain things by saying, you know what, I'm going to prioritize, or I'm going to park certain things, or I'm going to delegate. protecting your headspace, which can be about environment. It can be about contactability. It can be about, Bill Gates is famous for not wanting anybody to tell him any information about anything that's not immediately relevant. There's a famous story about he was being briefed by some software developers who were just, absolutely overjoyed about meeting Bill Gates. And they're like, yeah, you're going to be speaking at an event 6 months from now. You're going to be rolling out this. And he goes, 6 months, don't tell me a thing about it. And for me, that's telling. We're going to have the ability to get things done. This is from a book called The One Thing I'm going to touch on. I think some of you would have read it, where it talks about the impact of allowing ourselves to be distracted or flip back and forward and on the impact it has on the length of time to complete things. So I want to run through 5 key principles, and I'll give you a bit of a summary at the end of it. These are and I was looking through a lot of the body of work that I've put together over the last 5 or 6 years around time management, and these are the 5 that really sort of stuck out at me. The first one is the process of elimination. Daryl, you and I would have talked about this. There's 2 Daryls. That's awesome. We would have talked about this when we were doing pricing. And that is, sometimes when I go through and I do pricing, upfront pricing for a new client engagement, for example, and you come out with a number, and usually it's based on it taking between 10 to 20 hours for a basic, simple client, not the add-on stuff. And then you look at it and the business goes to you, can we knock that down by 40%? Can we make that sort of 6 to 12 hours? And I always remind of the 30% rule at this point, which is it's usually very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve greater than 30% efficiency gains without fundamentally changing the process or changing your business model, or alternatively, eliminating something. Elimination is by far the best way to get rid of fat and improve certain things. Does that make sense? So, have you guys ever heard of a stop doing list? You have a stop doing list. So we all have to-do lists, but sometimes people talk about, well, what if you made a list of things you're not going to do anymore? And I think that's just as important, what you take away as to what you have. One of the reasons for this is if you think about, if you've heard of the idea of being in the zone, it's very big in sports. Have you ever seen Steph Curry, the basketball player? Have you ever seen him warm up before the game? It's insane. He's got these goggles that he puts on, and basically what they do is they basically they flash the light on and off, and he can see the ring for just a second. But bang, he just goes around for about half an hour shooting basket after basket, some of them blind. And the reason he's doing that is because if he does this before the game, he gets in the zone. He gets to that point of what we call unconscious competence, where he's just flowing into something. Have you ever had that experience where you start work with something and for the first 15 to 20 minutes, you're like, oh, you know what, I'm not really into it. And then suddenly click. And that's flow. Have you ever seen a footballer, soccer player, who just goes on a run and scoring goal after goal after goal? That's flow. It's that point where you just suddenly get into rhythm. And there's a sweet spot. A lot of it's got to do with time, by the way. If you coders know a lot about flow. If you ever want to really annoy someone who's a coder, just give them 15 minutes to sit at the desk and look at the computer, and then go up and interrupt them. Then give them another 15 minutes and go and interrupt them again. Repeat that 4 times, they'll kill you. Because coders know that as they're coding, if they make one mistake and they have to come back and check lines of code, it's going to waste so much time. So being in the zone is about finding that spot where you are doing something you love, but also that spot between being undermotivated and overwhelmed. Generally, I don't know about you, but when I'm looking at something I'm not really into it and there's no time pressure, I kind of don't, I'll put it off. You know what I mean? And similarly, when I'm trying to do something and it's just too much, I don't know where to start, it's a similar sort of result. You with me? I think one of the bits about this elimination thing is I think as business owners, right, we all go down this route because we want to do things a certain way. Would you agree? And I think a lot of the time we end up doing things in a way that we didn't want to do because we kind of say yes, so we feel like we have to. And I think one of the most important things is to start by asking this question about what's your zone? And maybe we can work through this together. The first question I always ask is, first just note down, what do you most love to do in your business? What's the thing that really floats your boat? Another way of looking at it is you can turn what produces a higher ratio of satisfaction to time spent. In other words, what are the tasks that doesn't matter if you spend 5 minutes doing it every day. It boosts your satisfaction level up. If you do 15 minutes, you're on top of the world. Mine's writing. I love writing. What do you do in your business that doesn't feel like work? You kind of do it and you're like, I love that. Or what's this thing that not only are you really good at, better than everybody else, but you do it really a lot faster and nobody else can do it quite like you? Because I reckon if we talk about balance, let's say you're having a crappy day. You've got an SOA to get through, an ROA, and it feels like absolute treacle. if you can balance that day off with a bit of the stuff that you actually enjoy, then you're going to end up sort of easing the lows with the highs. You with me? One of the other things, one of the best advice I was given a while back, said when you're having a crappy day, phone that friend who makes you smile. Every Friday, the kids are into it now. Have you ever seen that? There's a video clip, Mufasa and Hyperman, where he's in the van, he's traveling in Ghana, and he goes, Mufasa, you know what day it is? And Mufasa goes, what? He goes, Friday then, it's Saturday, Sunday. Have you seen it? If you haven't, I'll shoot it through. It's impossible not to smile at that, and it just kicks off your Friday. So I just want to put it out there. When I talk about the things you love to do that produce a high ratio of time versus satisfaction, doesn't feel like work, and you're really good at, better than everybody else. Let's not be modest, but you are really good at it. What's your thing? Matt, what's yours, man?
I don't think I'm the best at everyone, but I love doing the modeling and the strategy stuff.
Okay. And how much of your week do you spend doing that?
I don't know.
Do you ever sit down and just do it for fun?
Probably. I don't know.
Do you ever just do it for fun?
No.
You like doing it?
I love doing all the modeling and the projections and the strategy, different options.
What stops you doing it?
Stuck doing the SOAs and ROAs and the stuff I hate.
Okay. Rachel?
I actually wrote the same thing down. I love doing the modelling and the big picture stuff for clients, but I also love doing kind of the strategy and the more creative aspects of the business side of things.
Do you guys both, Matt and Rachel, do you both outsource your plan production?
Yep.
Planning, yes. Yeah, just starting to again. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Josh, I know what you love to do. The investment.
You tell me. It is investment. Actually, I think specifically I love the comparison, like comparing things together and actually seeing how they change. But I like detail. And so like I could spend all day doing, projections all that time and just seeing how it changes by if I move this and I move that. But obviously I know that if I get stuck in that, that's where I can feel like a day can, time flies, but it's not necessarily the most productive thing in terms of obviously business. Yeah. So the second thing that I think I'm really good is telling a story, and I'm sure you're probably not surprised with that either.
I'm not surprised by that.
No, but I love telling stories to clients specifically and building that rapport as a result, so that they just feel really comfortable. So they're the two things that I love doing.
Do more of that as much as you possibly can. Trent, how about you?
Look, it'd be the client interaction. In particular, or the thing I enjoy most about that is when you first work out you've got their trust and they tell you something that's significant, and then you realise that you've sort of won them over as a trusted advisor.
Yeah. So not like I killed somebody last year on the Gold Coast. It's more like,
No, hopefully not that. But, more something about maybe a strained relationship with a child.
Fair
or
enough.
The fact that they have a child they might not talk to, or something that
they're trusting
is a deep fact that they're telling you. So.
Anita, what's yours?
I'm a bit of like between Josh and Rachel, where it's the client portfolios, but also like the planning as well, future planning and those sorts of things I really enjoy.
Cool. Daryl?
Client-facing work. So client appointments, client calls, client emails, anything to interact.
Okay, cool. Lyle, how about you?
I used to love doing the videos. I still do. I just lost my mojo maybe a couple of years ago. I used to do a monthly video, but whatever, it just sort of fell away with everything going on. So I really want to get back into that. Have thought about doing like a weekly one. But like Josh, like a fixed term agreements. I did a video and that went down really, really well, and a great way to communicate. And then the other one is just clients ringing up, and problem solving for them. It could just be something really simple. I just love being that person that they call, the first person they call, and you can just solve it like that. And then just have a one-on-one sort of conversation about anything,
I'm a real fixer as well. I love solving problems. And if I can help with the video, one thing I can say is make your setup really, really easy. The moment you got to set your camera up and all the rest of it, your mojo will go. But if it's just like bang, done, it makes it easy. Elizabeth?
I like doing client-facing work and doing the fixer stuff. And I also like doing the tax planning. That's fun. Yep.
And telling people the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yeah, and one source of truth. That's right.
Yeah. Debbie, Taylor?
My job's a little bit different because I'm the advice and operations manager. So I don't really do the same, I suppose, as just these financial advisors. But I love doing any kind of business development, anything that makes the business more efficient, or, you know, workflows or anything like that. I just love that.
Systems thinker.
I could do it all day. Yeah.
Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, I accompany Debbie with a lot of that stuff as well. But I think maybe especially over the last few weeks with the legislation changes, annual consent has been my day in, day out work.
Yeah.
That's fallen to me. So I feel really confident with that.
Okay, perfect. Everyone's got something, right? And I think maybe off the back of it, if you can find a way to incorporate more of that, particularly at times when you're going through the stuff, which, you know, hopefully it'll be pulled away a little bit more over the next few years. That's a good way of approaching it. Look, there's a few different ways you can do it. In the worksheet, there's something called a focus filter. This was another sort of model that was introduced to me a while ago. One of my favorite sayings is, it's a Croatian saying. I don't know if you've heard it. Not my circus, not my monkeys. Basically means it's, you know what, it's not my problem. I'm not dealing with it. And sometimes it's kind of important, particularly when people are driven by to help, right? Sometimes we get drawn into helping, and it stops us from kind of fitting our own mask. And it's kind of the idea that, you know, at the top of your filter, there'll be a bunch of tasks, opportunities which will flow through. And the first thing to ask is, you know, is this actually going to benefit the business? Because if it's not going to benefit the business, it's probably not us, right? Opportunities that come in, if it's not going to help where you're going as a business, don't do it. If it is part of that, you can go, well, is this my role? And if it's not your role, maybe you should hand it off to somebody else whose role it is. If it is part of your role, you can go, well, is this an immediate priority? If it's not, then it's something you can park. You know, it can be just a nice to have. And sometimes, you know, sometimes you'll skip all of that and just get to the end and you'll go, you know, I'm going to do it anyway. But I think one of the best filters I've ever put in place is, even if it's all of those things, I just ask, how do I feel about it? Is it a yes or a hell yeah? And if it's a hell yeah, it gets done. If it's not a hell yeah, it might be a no. Does that make sense? One of the things I'd really suggest, and I'm going to make some bonus content available around this. I know Debbie and Taylor, you guys are in the middle of doing this. This is something I do at least annually called a role audit. There is a worksheet in the workbook around this, but I actually think it's much easier to do this in a spreadsheet. But essentially what it is every year, if not sooner, you go through and you basically just brainstorm. What are all the tasks that I do to manage the business? Financial management, planning, tax, all the rest of it. Great. And you list them and you try and break them down into the tiniest little tasks possible. Then you go, what are all the tasks I do for new clients? What are all the tasks I do for marketing? What are all the tasks I do for existing clients, right? And you do it on those 6 areas. And then once you've got everything out and brainstormed, you ask yourself the question, is this something I'd like to do more of and I should focus on, in which case it's a green task? Is this something I have to do, which is a black task? And is it something that if I had the person, the process, the resources, the money, the time, I'd get someone else to do it? And usually what comes out of that, you'll realize that 40 to 70% of your role could be outsourced or handed off. From that point onwards, what you do is you time code it. You go, okay, well, how long is each of these tasks taking and how often are they happening? Because if you're sitting there and you've got something that you're doing that you could outsource and it's chewing up 2 hours every day, or 4 hours a week, you start by getting rid of that stuff. And this is a really easy way. I do this every year. Jen, I think we're well overdue this actually. And it helps you go, okay, what have I picked up along the way that I need to hand off? And equally important, what is the things I should, don't focus on the things that happen every now and again. Focus on the things that happen every week or every month or every day, because you hand those over, you get the time back. Does that make sense? So I'll make this available. And if you're keen to do it, I'll give you the spreadsheet I use, which is kind of pre-filled. Okay. Number 2 is kind of around insight and structure. And I think one of the most important things, Rachel, you touched on it, is because we know that we can tell ourselves sort of little white lies about time management. I think having a way of recording, structuring, and even tracking what you do is useful. I use my calendar for everything. In other words, I have meetings in there. G'day, Sean. I have meetings in there which come in for the calendar. But I also, if I need to do something like review blogs or produce content or re-record stuff or whatever it might be, work on client, I actually block out time in my diary and I make that commitment. More than that, each of my weeks looks a bit like this. It doesn't look exactly like this, but I actually pre-book out time. So for example, Mondays, if you tried to book a session in my diary on Monday morning, you'd see it's locked out. It's in red. And that serves 2 functions. Firstly, Jen can jump in there and she can see straight away that Monday morning I want to keep it free. Currently, I've got Wednesday blocked out because I'm taking Hermione on that day. So she can jump in and realize that days that are in green, she can go ahead and book stuff in. But equally importantly, because the way it's structured, anything that's in red is actually blocked out. It's marked as busy. which means if someone tries to book something in Calendly, it can only go in the spaces that are green. Does that make sense? So, I mean, Debbie, I think you guys do this, right? That enables me to make sure that when I'm sitting down, okay, I've got to do some work on this content piece, I can sit down, I can turn off the computer, and I can just get it done. If you're looking for an app that can be really useful, I use Gyroscope to track a bunch of stuff, but Rescue Time is a really useful app because what it does, it sits on your phone, it sits on your desktop, it sits on your laptop, and it will actually monitor what websites, what tools you're using, and then it will categorize them. So every week, every day, you can jump in and you can look and go, what am I actually using? What's the true nature of my my usage? And it'll give you a bit of a sense of how long you're working. Make sense? Good tool if you want to have a crack at it, if you're looking for a tool to track. If you've got any questions, shoot them out, by the way. Okay. Point 3 I want to touch on is if anybody's not read this book, The One Thing by Gary Keller, it's absolute gold. It's one of I think I've gifted a few people in here a copy of this book. I read it first, I think it's about 3 years ago. And I was so impressed by it. I did a session at one of our live events. There it is. Trent's got it. One of our live events talking about the lessons I learned from it. One of the big things it talked about the lie around multitasking and how no one can actually multitask. I know there's this whole myth that women are better at multitasking than men. In actual fact, we're all terrible at it. It's not even called multitasking. It's called multi-switching. It's switching your focus from one thing to another very, very quickly. Or another way of looking at it, you're just not doing any one thing particularly well. And it sort of reset a few things, in particular the way I approach planning, because I ran this session. Elizabeth, you might have been there actually. And I ran this session all about it. And everyone was like, that's great. And then we got to the bit in the program where we planned out the next 90 days. And I looked at the worksheet in front of me, which had choose 3 projects. And then I looked at this book that was going one thing. And I looked at this, choose 3 projects. And I remember telling everyone in the room and saying, this isn't going to work like this anymore. And they were like, nope. And so from that point onwards, I asked everybody to choose one project. And if they finish that project, they start work on the next project. I think that quarter was without doubt the quarter when people got the most things done. There's a few insights that came from that. It's when you ask yourself and you force yourself to ask, what's the one thing that I can do now that if I focus on doing first and foremost is going to make everything else easier, unnecessary? It forces you to do a few things. It forces you to make a choice. Daryl, you and I had this conversation when we had 5 or 6 different projects and we turned around and said, what's the number one thing we need right now? We need to free up your time and increase the profitability of the business. Because if we don't free up your time, we're not going to give you the time to focus on the things you love. And if we don't create the profitability, you guys are going to continue to work really, really hard. And then we chose to do pricing first. Similar sort of thing with a few. Trent, we sat down and said, one of the things we need to focus on first is not the sexiest project, but we need to focus on systemizing. Because if we get that running, it's going to free us up to do things later on. You can apply this to all different things. You can go, what's the one thing, if I focused on doing this better, first and foremost, would make everything else easier in the way you give advice? How about in the way you manage your time? In the way you engage clients? Maybe video is your one thing. It would not only improve the quality of your engagement, but it makes it faster to get out. Relationships, you can apply it to that. In the way you market, in the way you look after yourself, in the way you manage your team. If you can apply this question every single time, it gives you this singularity of focus. It also talks about being really specific about what you're trying to achieve and bigger. Rather than saying you want more new clients, which tends to be a really small and broad, I want 50 new clients, or which is big and broad, it's better. Small and specific is I want more new clients who no longer who pay more than my average and I love working with. But when you go, okay, big and specific goals, 50 new clients who pay at least $5,000 a year and I will love working with, it makes it much easier to sort of aim for things. The reason this one thing works from planning and all the rest of it is, firstly, it makes you decide what's most important to you. It acts like a filter and kind of removes any of the noise around what you should or shouldn't do. And it causes something called a domino effect, which is when you knock over the first thing, if it's the right thing, it can make knocking over the second thing easier. The third thing, even easier, and next thing, you've got this kind of, domino effect, exponential growth. A lot of people choose the wrong projects to do at the same time, or they choose the wrong projects to focus on once. I'm guilty early on in my business, as I thought building systems was what I needed to do. And I learned very quickly the first hurdle I needed to come up against was marketing and proposition. Does that make sense? Okay, 2 more. Who's a MasterChef fan? Okay, I don't mind it. I like the Gordon Ramsay one. Although I must admit, I found myself I knew I was watching too much Gordon Ramsay, or I couldn't go and order fish and chips and without telling someone to bugger off. But basically, you notice the one thing about MasterChef, right? Bad joke. You notice the one thing about MasterChef. When they start cooking, they get time. And at the end of that period, they have to plate up whatever they've been cooking and serve it. Doesn't matter what it's like, right? Now, I started doing this hour of power process thing at the beginning of the year. And I made the mistake of approaching it by saying, right, well, I'm going to sit down for an hour. I'm going to run the clock for 40 minutes. And you get as much as you can get done in 40 minutes. And it was about a month ago, maybe a month and a half, I realized that's the wrong message. What I should have been said is, you need to get this process done in 40 minutes. Now, when you make that shift from I'm going to get as much done as I can at a certain time to how can I get this done in such a way that it's finished in 40 minutes, what happens is you change your way of thinking. Peter Thiel, who's a famous sort of tech investor in the States, he was in the Social Network. He was the guy who Mark Zuckerberg came in his pajamas and he said, "Who's Edward Severin?" He has this question that he likes to ask startups, which is, if I told you had to achieve 10 years worth of growth in 6 months, what would you do differently? And when asked about that question, he said it's not about whether or not they can achieve everything in 10 years, because they probably can't. It's about the fact that when you ask someone a question like that, it breaks their way of thinking. They suddenly realize, well, I can't work the way I normally do. I have to change the way I operate. One of the ways you can do it, and I found really useful, is to chunk things down. One of the templates we've used traditionally in the program is called the Project Dissector. And it's a template for getting really, really clear as a start on why you're doing the project and what's involved. But then we take it and we go, okay, if this is a big project, we break it down into 3 things. What are the tasks that we need to do to start off? They could be research tasks. They could be client research tasks. They could be analyzing what you currently do, gathering together, your target client information. What are your second level tasks, which are the things you need to do to put it in place? And then what are the tasks that you can put to the end and finalize, finish up for them? Does that make sense? But then you can even take those and chunk it down further. And you go, okay, which of those am I going to do on Monday? Which of those am I going to do on Friday? Which of them am I going to do the following Friday? What am I going to do, all day Tuesday? And what is the stuff I'll work out how to do it later? Because I don't need to plan that far ahead. And I don't know about you, but I find that when I'm faced with something big and hairy, and sometimes when I've got a bit at the end that I don't quite know how it's going to work, if I just think big, but then break it down into one foot in front of the other, it makes it much easier to make the progress. It also makes it easier to achieve momentum, which I think is one of the most important things. Is this making sense so far? One thing I'm going to mention straight off the bat is if we're talking about changing the way you do things in order to achieve certain things, Matt, you've already mentioned it. I think dictation is something that everybody should be not just looking at, but also, getting involved in. It's madness to me that if you go back and look at the Mad Men series, that everything back then was dictaphones and touch typing. And yet somewhere in amongst all this technological innovation, we thought it was a good idea to get everybody to go to typing at 40 words per minute. It's just so slow. If you do dictation, you can go from being able to produce, if a file note takes you 40 minutes, you can reduce that down to about 8 minutes, just simply by the fact that most people can speak at 200 words per minute and type at 40. Does that make sense? Usually when I say this, people say, well, what technology would you use? You can use a variety of different things. Otter, I think a few of you use. Some people use Dragon Dictation. Debbie, I know you've absolutely nailed this. You actually Dragon dictate straight into Xplan. Kudos. Rev is another good one, if you're willing to pay for it. Voxer we use for internal communication between the team. Loom is another video solution if you want to do video. Do you use Loom, Josh? Yeah. And we've started using a Chrome extension called Voice in Typing for doing our process mapping, which is it's working really well for me. But the thing is, the tech's kind of part one. If you're going to use it as well, you also need a framework. This is, by the way, the background of this is the Enigma machine. Has everyone heard of the Enigma machine? World War II, it was a coding device. It was uncrackable. If you've seen the movie The Imitation Game, you'll know the story. But what made this uncrackable was firstly the code in the machine would change with every keystroke. In other words, every time you type something in, the codec would change. And the only way to decipher it was the person who was sending and the person receiving had to have the same code in the machine, which would change every day. And it's similar. When you're dictating, if you have a framework, firstly, it means you're following a set structure, but anybody who's getting it on the back end, your team or your power planning outsource can grab it and they know the structure. I'm going to share I may have shared in some of the tools. I've put together ready-made sort of frameworks for if you're if you need to do a first appointment file note, the idea is, I think they're credit card sized. You can get them printed out, put them in a credit card, laminate them, put them in your wallet. And then when you need to do a file note on the fly, you just pull it out and you read to each of the bullet points. Same deal with client review. And I think there's I'll make available a PowerPoint version of this because most of you may want to go through and personalize it and customize it. You can even use them for video blogging, Lyle. I find it really easy to have a structure in front of me, even if I don't fill it out, because then I know, okay, intro, story, summary, intro, hook, story, summary, and I just go through each of the points. Same deal with the client messaging thing. Just having a framework to it gives it some structure. I even use it for if I'm delegating something out. So I make sure that I'm covering all the bases and explaining everything. And there's the one I use for processes. It's just a game changer when you're able to do it. And I mean, I know for a fact that those of you who've done the Hour of Power with me will know that the amount of I can get done in 40 minutes simply because I'm all over this is usually far more than anybody who's not doing that can get done. Is that cool? Any questions so far? Oh, by the way, this is the process. Because obviously if you're going to use this, Matt, you would know he did a bit of work on this. It's really good that your team understands that once a day they jump into Otter or they jump into whatever it is. They check out and see what's in there. Is it a blog? Is it a blog? Is it a file note? Is it a process? And then you have a documented process so they know what to do with it next. Does that make sense? I'll share this too. A lot of people miss out the process. They just start doing it. And then what happens is you're the one that has to go into Otter and you're the one that has to put it into Xplan, which kind of makes the problem worse because you're already 2 days along. That makes sense. Final one I'm going to touch on before I circle back is environment. Who works in coffee shops? Yeah. Elizabeth, what do you find about coffee shops works for you?
There's anticipation and enjoyment.
Yeah.
And people just engage. And you can build up rapport, you can be funny, you can be human, and it feels less like this is a possible financial transaction and more about the course of everyday life. I don't know. Yep.
It's funny. I find it really easy to write in coffee shops, really good blogs. And it's something that's unique to being in a coffee shop. And I'm analyzed it time and time again. Is it the background noise? Is it the fact there's motion around me? Because do you know what? If I'm going in and doing financial analysis, it doesn't work as well. Creating content in coffee shops works really well. But, working on client work for some reason doesn't. Does that make sense? Usually, I know a good friend of mine, he actually does all of his lives near the beach. He does all of his sales calls walking up and down the beach because he just finds that walking, I don't know if anybody here walks when they're talking on the phone, so much better. But he finds the beach, he's more amicable. He's more productive in the conversation. He feels less the need. And I guess the point is we all have an environment that we work best in. And sometimes we kind of just default doing all of our work in a certain environment instead of moving it around. One of the reasons I think changing environment works is when I talk about environment as well, it can be physical environment, but it's also got to do with what you take with you. I think, Rachel, you mentioned it. If I'm doing work that doesn't require email, I'll shut down the email. I don't have notifications because I freaking hate them. Email is I could do a whole session on why email is I think one of the biggest distractions we deal with. We've got a module on it called Shared Inbox. I think once you get to beyond about 4 people, 5 people in your business, you should have a shared inbox. But email is something that I think if you don't need it around you when you're doing certain work, working on strategy, you need to get into flow and you should have email. Same deal with iPhone. One of the best buttons, I hope most of you know this, one of the best buttons on the iPhone is the one you can do there called, it's the sort of the do not disturb. When you click that, it will silence any phone call or message unless someone phones you twice in 2 minutes. I love that. It means that if anybody needs to get hold of you, like it's an emergency, they can come through. But other than that, it's just turned off. I've had days where I forgot to turn it off. And it's brilliant because you just get through it and you're like, oh, that's why I was productive today. Who uses that? Beautiful. Okay. Should just stop me there. If you really want to, there's a number of anti-distraction tools. Rescue Time has a functionality where you can shut off access to certain websites. So you can shut off incoming email. There's so many out there. If you really feel like, I want to be able to sit down, disconnect, and you still have access, you can use some of these. But I think the best thing I can say is decide what you need and take only what's required to do the task. Cool. Quick summary. The 5 rules, the elimination rule, which is about the best route to getting more efficient is to try and choose some things to eliminate that you're not going to do, you're going to hand off, Role audit's a great way to start with that. The tracking and structure rule, which is very much about if you can use your calendar or some other tool for committing appointments in your diary, for spending the time. One of the benefits of the calendar is you can move things around as priorities change, and focusing on maximizing your time in the zone, or at least balancing your workload. Rule number 3 is the one thing, which is really about, if you've got 7 different things on the go, if you can sit down and go, what's the one thing I could do now that's going to change that and make it easier, and being really specific and big about the outcome. Task to time rule is a really great way of saying, instead of me sitting down for an hour and getting as much done, how can I approach this in a way that it's done in an hour? And sometimes, to be honest, dictation is the way to go. A number of times I've been sat there and working through a proposal and I go, screw it, I'm just going to stand up and dictate it, and we'll clean up later and it's done in 20 minutes. It's insane. Or videos, there you are trying to get an email out to a client. You go, this is too complex. I'm going to talk to it. I'm going to send a Boxer. And the environment rule, which is choose your space, work in a space that enables you to produce your best and take only what you need to do the work. So I'm going to hand this over to you. I've got a bunch of worksheets here and I'm happy to work through them with you. So this is a challenge. Over the next 3 weeks, I want each of you to be able to get back ideally 15 hours, but at least a day that you can block out. Where do you think, just based on what we've spoken today, the time passed, where do you think you could likely save a few hours in the next week or 2? Matt, what do you reckon?
I think elimination for me.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of stuff that's why COVID's so good. It's an excuse not to do so much stuff I don't like doing.
So do you know what you're going to eliminate, or do you need to do a bit of analysis?
Yeah, I think a bit of analysis. There's, I think I'm going to do that role audit. There's stuff that I need to pass on to Hart. Yep.
So the role order, that's the spreadsheet. That's the where you go through and you analyze task, subtask, time. But I'll give you the spreadsheet, because I think working through the spreadsheet enables you to sort of copy and paste stuff. But my suggestion is if you watch the role reboot module, great, you'll know how to do it. If not, just check that out quickly. It'll give you a bit of an overview. Sit down for half an hour, get as much as you can out, then put it away, come back to it a little bit later, do another 15 minutes, do a final 10 minutes, and then just do the time coding and hand off, and just choose 5 things to hand off and you'll be flying. Beautiful. Sean, door's closed today. That's weird.
Hey, mate. No, it's all open. Yeah, that's right. I'm the same. It's that role audit and eliminating tasks that I shouldn't be doing.
Okay, so you're the role audit?
Yeah.
Cool. Elizabeth?
More delegating.
More delegating.
Yeah.
Do you know what you need to delegate?
Yes, but I think that I also need to share. I need to claim more back for myself and delegate other stuff to other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So the question is, if you know where, if the goal is time, then what I think you need to start is looking at what are the tasks that I'm doing most frequently, that are chewing up time regularly, that are dropping me out of focus mode, and focus. If you can find, analyze that and just go, there's 3 things that's costing me 4 hours a day.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of helping the people who are helping me too much, and they need to take ownership of it to get.
So one of the frameworks I've sort of put in there, but I'll give you a bit of I'll put a bit of video extra. It's the delegation brief. And sometimes when you delegate, it's because you're not clear enough to the person about what you want.
Yep.
This is kind of a good reminder for me. Let's go, what is the task you're delegating? And ideally, you want to delegate a few tasks. I always think about delegating tasks as an if and then thing. Hey, this is the task. If this happens, then do this. If this happens, then do this. Oh, by the way, if that happens after that, then do this. You give people a flow rather than can you do this and it stops there.
Yep.
Explain to them, why do you need it? Because often when you explain, I need this because I'm trying to do this, they can see the big picture, particularly if you've only worked together, and the outcome you'd like to achieve. Outline what research they may need to do or information they might need to do. If you have a high-level idea of the activity that you think might need to happen, you might need to phone that person, do some research there, get the information here, talk to that person, and then sort of outline if you need to. Here's some resources that might be useful. And you can go in as much or as little detail. This is the bit that really I like, which is this a level 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5? Level 1 is do this exactly the way I've told you to. So I'll make that bigger. Whoops. Do this exactly the way I've told you to.
Yep.
Don't deviate. I've already researched the options. I know what to do. Just do it. Versus on the other end, The other end is, you know what? Go away, just do it, put it into play. If there's something that's really going to surprise me, let me know. Otherwise, I don't need to know about it. Just do it. I'll fix up those definitions. But if you can tell people this is a level 3 or a level 2, interestingly, Rach and I used this for a while. Babe, this is a level 1. I really need my birthday to look like this. Or, it's level 5. Book whatever restaurant you want. Just don't book the one I don't like. Weirdly, it actually really works. I'll get the right template for that. Does that help?
Yep.
Cool. Debbie, you're laughing at me. I like it. What, Debbie Taylor, what are you guys going to do? What's useful? What's going to get you some time back?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
So we just have, I don't know if you've started to pick up a vibe from our office, but we just have one drama after the other, and we've just come out of a 14-day quarantine. So we're just currently just scrambling to find our feet again. So, yeah, I'm not sure.
Do you know one of the things, there's a template in here, which is called calendar programming, which is on a monthly basis. I don't do ideal week, because what happens with ideal week, it's all fine until about March, and then Easter comes along and blows everything up. I actually analyze and I go, it's February. It's February, which means I've only got, let's see, I think February is 20 days. Okay, what do I need? And the first one I always put in there is timeout. You know what? I need a couple of days. And I'll go through and go, I'm going to take, and if the month starts on Monday, 1st, 8th, 15th, whatever it is, and I'll go, you know what? I'm taking that one off. I'm taking that one off. During the ski season, if I was allowed to leave Sydney, you'd see in my diary every Friday blocked out for potentially going to the snow. Because if I block it out, it stands a chance of happening. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know if you have timeout blocked, but
so we went through our calendar and did all this. We've used so many of your techniques in our office now that we're just pretty bloody efficient anyway. So when you're asking us what we'll implement, it's like, well, we've already done so much of what you've given us, and it's just been amazing for us. So
I know, and this is the thing, I was coming into this going, you guys are pretty ninja when it comes to systems and managing things. So a lot of this, I think, was for you guys, is probably going to be more of a either one or two things you could tweak, or just a reminder of what you're doing is working well. So no, that's totally cool. Josh?
Yeah, mine's going to be, I've been trying to use Otter for the dictation of file notes and whatever, but I get just, as you know, detailed and too talkative.
Yeah.
That ends up taking longer than if I had just sat down and typed it. So I think I need those little cue cards that you were mentioning before, frameworks, just so I can talk to them and stick to them and not get carried away with what the client was doing on the weekend that we talked about.
Yeah.
I'll go into things like that, and then I find I should have sat down and typed it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, when I got the first I got them made up on plastic cards and I'd hand them out. The only issue is, as file notes got more and more complicated, I found that people needed to develop their own. So there's a PowerPoint template we'll share. I would suggest grab the PowerPoint template, adopt your bullet points that you want to speak to. Then if you can, print it out on card and make it as a prompter card. If you're going to make a big one, just leave it on your desk, one on your desk, one in the meeting room or whatever it is. But yeah, try and stick to the structure. And secondly, if you find yourself waffling, and I do, usually you waffle when you're not succinct enough. That whole Winston Churchill, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. Just hit pause. Oh, you've not heard that, Elizabeth? It's brilliant, isn't it? Just hit pause. Interestingly, he was a dictation guy. He didn't know how to use a typewriter. In other words, when you find yourself, just hit pause, compose your thoughts, and go again. It works every time.
I think my other thing is that I can't look at the alter notes as I'm talking because they distract me. So,
well, this is another thing. Just pick up if you got a mic.
I've just got the headphones, so no, that's on my to-do list, so to speak. But I wanted to just start getting things done rather than waiting for me to go and get that mic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, being able to walk while you do it is helpful. I find. Rachel, how about you? What have you taken from today that you can implement?
I'm keen to do the role audit.
Yep.
I'm also thinking I should do more dictation and video.
Yep.
So yeah, probably don't do enough of that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll definitely get that role audit module loaded up straight away so people can jump in and do it. And I'll make sure the files are uploaded. Anita, you're the second Quello I know. My third, actually, if we include Paolo.
Yeah. I think the task to time rule. So I do block out the times in my diary, but I don't necessarily always stick to them as well. So it's just trying to make sure that we can get it done in that time period.
Yeah, the Pomodoro thing. And just try some stuff out. And a number of times I've been through and I'm like, I'll try this way of developing presentations, and it sucks. It doesn't work. but I'm glad I tried it. Pomodoro is another time management thing that sometimes people use, but that's perfect.
I wanted to ask about that, Stuart, with that Pomodoro. What's it called? Productivity or whatever that Pomo thingo is called.
Pomodoro.
I had a look at that, and it said, have like your half an hour bit and then 5 minutes after 25, like 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off.
Yeah.
That to me seems really short. Like, should it be a little bit longer than that for what we do or not?
Depends on the task.
Because I am someone that tries to power through. Like, I had a bit of a chuckle when you brought that up earlier.
It depends a bit on the task. I don't use Pomodoro because I personally, there's some work. Some of the best work I do is when I give myself a big long block of time to sort of graze. Do a bit of the and it's particularly around content. So to do a 20-minute stint would work if I have a specific task I'm working on. But if I'm working on something that's deep work, that's not going to work for me. At the same time, different people are different. I think most people's attention span starts to drop after about 50 minutes. This is way too long for a webinar for exactly that reason, but that's also why we have a bit of interaction. So, I mean, when you can feel, it's the whole thing, but when you can feel your energy starting to drop and your attention, go do a walk, go do something else. There was a study years ago in school where they, instead of teaching 60-minute blocks, they would actually teach a 15-minute lesson. They'd stand up and do some exercise and teach the same 15-minute lesson, same 15-minute, stand up and do some more exercise and then teach the same 15-minute lesson. And the retention rates, particularly amongst boys, were off the charts. And I haven't heard anything about it, but that to me made total sense. So, I mean, with all this stuff, it's about finding the stuff that works for you, but there is a core in it that sort of works. Does that help?
Yeah, maybe I might put that as an hour.
5 minutes before a Zoom is also very productive.
Yeah, you know what? Here's a general rule of thumb. Don't start anything 20 minutes before a meeting. It's just no point, honestly. I mean, this is, Elizabeth, you and I had a chat this morning because I realized that, okay, I've got half an hour. That's a good time to have a chat instead of start work 5 minutes before a Zoom. Yeah, 5 minutes before a coaching meeting. That's a great time to send me all the stuff that we promised you'd do last time around. That's perfect. That's what we need. Lyle, how about you, man?
Yeah, look, I think the role audit, like everyone else was saying, is a really good exercise. And I like the idea. I think instead of mapping out like all this process stuff, I think just a straight up role audit, just to try and get it down on paper as quickly as possible. I think I'm pretty good at delegating. I've got a really great team.
Yeah.
And I sometimes feel that they're busy enough, if you know what I mean. And so I might take back some tasks that maybe I shouldn't be doing. So then I sometimes think, well, yeah, some of the stuff they're doing might be able to be done more productive or, in a better way. So that's sort of my sticking point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe the rollout's a good place because you can look at it and go, holy moly, it's 60% of my role. Like in theory, I could knock off 3 days of my job and still everything would be fine if I could just find. And it also gives you focus on the stuff that you do that you should be doing more of, which for most people's case, it's marketing, seeing clients, speaking to clients. That's the stuff that drives the business forward. And often, it gets lost because we get stuck into creating SOA templates and whatever we do. Daryl, how about you?
Delegation, elimination, and structuring of activity. Already, Stu, we've got a lot of productivity hacks in the business. So the structuring of file notes, structuring of client review meetings, all that is already in place.
Beautiful.
Our licensee's been pretty good in providing us with compliant templates.
That's great. Cool. So look, I said I got a whole bunch of worksheets. I'm happy to work through any of them if you want to do now. But ultimately, I'm gonna make all of them available. I'll add the supplementary contact by the end of the day. But I mean, strategies that I came in thinking that you could do, and this is in the pack. If your focus is on defining your zone, really getting clear what you're good at, what you're best at, what you should be doing most of it, and committing to doing ideally 50-50 at any time. That's a good place to start. If you like the focus filter, define what the business mission is, what your role is, and what your priorities are, and then run things through that filter. Role audit, we've already spoken about. Audio dictation, I think we've spoken about at length. Blocking out time and changing your environment. One thing, if you haven't read it, go and buy it. It's a great book. Programming the calendar. This is one we didn't talk, but identifying at the beginning of the week what you're just not going to get done. Do you know how cathartic that is? Yeah, that's not going to happen. And just going, okay, we got two options. I'm going to delay it or I'm going to give it to someone else. There's something very powerful about just, I'm the boss. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to do that. and just reality. And also there's a strategy, there's an area in there if you feel like you're prone to procrastination, or even you've got clients who are prone to procrastination. If you're interested, there's a short video that explains this, but it's ultimately about understanding procrastination is usually caused by 4 different forces. It's either someone's not motivated, they're lacking direction, they're overwhelmed, or they're distracted. And the reason why it's important to recognize is the strategies you deploy for each different, cause is very, very different. For someone who's not motivated, what you tend to do is you want to increase intensity, break it down, do sprint sets. So what you tend to do with someone there is you help them find focus and increase the pace, which is set some milestones for yourself, clear timeframes, and then go focused on tasks. That makes sense? However, similarly, if you've got somebody who is lacking direction, that's about sort of helping them set a direction, find focus, and map out the plan, provide them clarity, which is typically about reiterating the process, getting very, very clear on the problem that you're facing or you're attacking, and defining the outcome you're going to achieve at the end of it all. Does that make sense? Do you want to keep explaining this, or? Okay, I'll finish it off then. If you're working with someone who's distracted, there's shiny things all over the place. Again, the strategy that you wouldn't put in place there is you wouldn't put in place intensity or pace. You would focus on providing the clarity, break it down to just the essential stuff, and cull everything else to get traction. And that's really about choosing a specific strategy. So if you've got a lot going on, different software systems, just pick one thing you're going to implement, define specifically the result you're trying to achieve, and get really, really clear on this is what we need to do. Forget all of that. That's the thing we need to do. Does that make sense? The final mode is if you're overwhelmed. Again, you wouldn't want to sort of, with someone who's overwhelmed, what you're trying to do is you're trying to break it down into smaller pieces, and you're just trying to get them started again, rather than trying to go big picture. So you simplify the plan. You make it really simple, break it down in tiny little steps. You just focus on the next small step. Can be really useful. I think in the program, this is actually under onboarding clients, because sometimes clients get stuck in procrastination mode and understand what's going on here. Is it because they're not motivated? Maybe I need to re-engage them and talk about, we're doing this because we're trying to achieve this big shiny goal at the end. First step is you just got to get this done. If they're lacking direction, sometimes it's about going back and going, okay, let's just focus down on what we're trying to achieve and the problem we're solving right here and now. If you've got a client who's distracted by 100 things, cull everything and just focus on, we're going to get this in place. Someone who's overwhelmed, a very different approach. So there you have it, ladies and gents, the 10-hour time reclaim formula. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you've taken, 1, 2, 3, maybe even more strategies that you can apply. For me, the biggest one has always been that audio file noting is one of the ones that just shifts the dial straight away. So if you're not, I think more people are using audio file noting these days, but if you're not, if you're still doing things in a written way, audio is the way to go. And there's so many great tools around now that there weren't, even just a few short years ago. Hopefully this has been useful. It's given you a bit of insight into sort of a bit more. Obviously, we're going to be mixing it up with the Finnovator. There's going to be some of these. There's going to be some of the usual interview stuff. If you know somebody who you think would make a great guest for the Finnovator, please drop me a line. Stuart, Stewart, at Audere, audere.com.au, because I'm always keen to talk to people. I don't know about you, but I sometimes get these sort of cold emails from random people. Usually it's not even random people. It's random people's podcast finder agents asking me if they want to come on the podcast. And I've got this general rule. If I don't know anything about someone and they don't have a story to tell, they're not being put forward by someone I have a connection with, I just don't want to do it. And that's why if you do know somebody and you are a listener to the podcast, you know what this is all about, you could be at best position to kind of connect me with somebody whose story deserves to be told, who has an amazing business, has built something really, really interesting that deserves to be shown, or is just a subject matter expert in an area that is relevant to advice businesses. That's it from me. As always, if you want to find out more about what I do, head over to audere.com.au, audere.com.au. Otherwise, stay tuned for an upcoming episode. There you go. And I'll speak to you soon. Take care.